keeping the window, and let me advance the slide. All right, looks like we're back on track here. So as we had promised earlier, Angel came in with kind of a two-part question. I'll go ahead and read this aloud, and we'll have a little bit of interaction here. Angel asks, what are the risks of implementing predictive analytics / modeling activities in a production or manufacturing environment when the process or IT systems are known to be outdated and inefficient? There's a second part of the question. When planning for a predictive analytics and modeling project, is there a way to not consider current processes / IT systems and gain quality and measurable results? Scott Terry has stepped out. We hope for him to return in just a little bit. We can start with Keith on this. Angel, I'll go ahead and unmute you now, and Keith, know if you have any questions to extend the question to Angel's question, you can certainly engage with her. But so I have some notions in mind, but I often get kind of greedy with responses, so I'm going to try to refrain, but I suspect this might come into some discussion around an analytics sandbox. Keith, if there's any part of the question you'd like me to reread, just let me know.
Sure. It reminds me, actually, Angel, of a situation I was facing when I was talking to a healthcare client, and I don't know how many of you have even friends and acquaintances, much less colleagues in healthcare, that might have mentioned Epic. Epic is this big new source of data. It's, it now goes back a few years ago. But at the time that I was talking to the client about it, they said, gosh, maybe we shouldn't do any modeling this year. Maybe we should wait until Epic is installed. But then when you start to talk about the realities of it, you realize that if you want to be looking at 12 or 24 months of data, which is quite common in these kinds of projects, now you're talking waiting 3 years. So I think the reality is no one has the variables or the infrastructure and all the pieces in place that are the ideal. That's never the case. So I think you have to start with what you've got. The other thing that I would say related to that is that, we talk about kind of fancy things like in database modeling or, doing modeling in Hadoop and all these new technologies. But truth be told, and I've been doing this since the late 90s, the actual modeling process hasn't changed as much as you would think. I know all these different technologies, come and replace the ones before them, but the actual day-to-day behavior during the modeling phase is really quite similar to what it was 20 years ago. It hasn't changed that much. And what usually, almost always happens, well, majority of the time anyway, is that the data is effectively offline. You're not really building the model against the database or against the data warehouse. You're gathering the data, you're assembling it very carefully. Eric's mention of a sandbox is exactly right here. Then you're prototyping the model, and then eventually, of course, if you're going to do this right, you've got to deploy it, and that's when you have to worry about the IT systems. So in short, I would say there's always issues, there's always concerns, but you've got to start.
Keith, that was such a succinct response. I anticipated needing more background or info, but Angel, since we have you unmuted, did that seem to be the exact nature of the response, or was the scope wide enough? Is there any part that may remain?
No, that was good.
Great.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Glad that was helpful.
I had another question too. What out of your series of courses that are coming up would be a good course to take in regard to my question, to go deeper into it?
Eric, do you want to comment first, or should I?
Oh, either one of us could. Since we have the instructor on the line, go ahead, Keith. Obviously, it's going to be the tails of what you had described. I'll just lead the question a little bit, probably leaning towards strategic implementation, so that Angel or anybody with related interests would really hit the topic that's most involved, I would think, with assess, plan, and deploy, right?
Well, I would certainly agree. I think the trick is in understanding that although at first it sounds like a modeling question, it's really not a modeling question at all, is it? It's really kind of a strategic question about where are we now, where are we trying to go, and how are we going to get there using the infrastructure and the data that we have. So to tackle that well starts with a good assessment. So that, that's what I would add to your answer, Eric, but of course I agree.
Sure. Yeah, and Angel, as you've heard Keith express in his presentation, you'd be surprised at how many organizations don't look downstream, and they're so anxious to get that data and start building an analytic model and gaining those insights. And those insights, like we were saying, they have to align with the organization's priorities. But the other thing they have to do is be operational or operationalized. And so we may be able to extract the data at some point and build that analytic sandbox so you don't have to rely on IT as much. But then have you looked ahead to determine, once you have the rules from the model, how can we actionalize it? Is it simply going to give recommendations to leadership, or is it something that we want to put into an automated process? And it almost seems trite to bring that up, and yet with our direct implementations, we find that most organizations that fail or fall short, it's not because of inadequate models or technically, technical accuracy. It has to do with looking at a lot of the kinds of deployment issues and making it operational where the project fails and falls short. And that's the emphasis of this webinar. So that's where your question, I think, is so pertinent. And by all means, that's what we hit in the more comprehensive course. Project planning, if you could only do one day, that's really going to address a lot of the planning that's involved with both accessing the data and making it actionable. But if you can take the full course in Tuesday and Friday, there's a lot of additional material around how we operationalize the modeling activities. So hopefully that's a good response for your training curiosity. Is there anything else before we head to, there's two remaining questions.
No, that's good. Thanks.
Sure, Angel. Yeah, appreciate the questions, and thanks for affording the time today. Okay, we'll go on to the next question. Here's one that just came in. This is from Mary Lou. Since I'm new to much of the language used in this webinar, could you give me examples of outliers in education? So when you say outliers in education, you mean the education industry, outliers as it pertains to training that we offer, or outliers? Can you tell us what you mean by training, and we'll come back to this question to make sure that we target that exactly. Unless, Keith, you feel you'd be pretty confident in what Mary Lou is targeting when she says outliers in education.
Well, I guess it could be an outlier on a education-related variable, like you might expect that you could, if you looked at a bunch of students, that the average number of days missed in a school year might be 2 or 3, yeah. But you could have one student that had been out 21 days, something like that.
Keith, I'm embarrassed. I'm tucking my tail here. Mary Lou and I had spoken just a few days ago in a call, and indeed, she is looking at applying analytics in an education environment. So she's looking at things like admissions and how do we attract more students that will perform like our best students. How do we reduce attrition and failure, those kinds of things. So could you give examples of outliers in education or related industries or even related approaches? Do you have anything in your pocket that you could offer up to Mary Lou?
Well, again, let's just stick with the example that I threw out initially. So it's actually quite interesting. See what happens when someone is trying to do descriptive statistics, and obviously, what we do in a predictive analytics course is not really about statistics, but it's a topic that comes up on occasion, as you would think, even though it's not a primary theme. So if you're describing attendance over the course of a year, you're going to want to include all of the students in that. That's only natural. But what will happen is little statistical things like the mean will start to jump around with those outliers where the median will stay rather stable. So what we learn in Stats 101 is that sometimes on occasion we have to consider removing outliers. But maybe what you're doing is predictive analytics and you're trying to figure out which students are most in need of some kind of intervention, like a home visit. Okay? Well, then if you took the outliers out and you're going to send somebody out whose specialty is dealing with truancy, let's say, well, then you've just thrown out the records that most need your attention, right? So the notion is you really do have to have a good plan and know what you're trying to accomplish with the model. Otherwise, the way that you prepare the data won't be consistent with your goals. And that's, I think, what people don't realize about preparing data. They think that it's about cleaning the data, like there's this step-by-step recipe that you follow, and it's not true. You have to start with what you're trying to accomplish, and then you create the data set that is most able to help you accomplish it.
That's great advice. And Mary Lou just came back and said, yeah, that was a great example. So quick on your feet, and thanks for that advice, Keith. So we'll take one more. We've got about 4 minutes remaining, and this is an interesting question from Justin. Justin asks, how does predictive marketing ensure exact results for clients? If you don't mind, Keith, I'll go first on this one while you ponder your response, because I had the benefit of seeing this come in a little bit earlier. So I would start with, I have my own kind of, I wouldn't call it famous, but I have a frequent saying that I would never use a neural network to balance my checkbook. So in essence, that's to say that predictive analytics does not produce exact scores, but it can produce individual scores that represent many factors from the overall solution space and drawn from interaction between multiple behaviors or multiple variables. So it's a highly accurate, personalized predictive score, but certainly not exact. In fact, if you saw some of those analytic quips going by in the waiting room before we started the webinar, there's a great quote by George E.P. Box who says, all models are wrong. The question is, how wrong do they need to be before they're no longer useful? So, so predictive analytics gives you a way to, again, come up with a much more accurate score and potential treatment for each client in your predictive marketing effort. But no, there is no such thing as exact. That would be a heuristic. Those would be hard-coded rules, perhaps, but not predictive analytics. But predictive analytics certainly can allow for individual scores and actions that are highly personalized beyond any other technology that's capable out there. Keith, before we wrap up the webinar, would you like to extend for Justin?
Sure. I think the trick is that since time series forecasting is forecasting, and since predictive analytics is about predictions, you would think, gosh, they're really similar. In fact, they are kind of thrown together often enough that we have to talk a little bit about the differences in the course, although the course is clearly more focused on the predictive analytics. So let me briefly describe the difference here. If you're doing marketing, what you might want to do is within a particular radio listening area, you might want to forecast the number of folks that are going to hear a particular radio ad and then call in on an 800 number. In fact, I was having a session with a client just yesterday where we were talking about exactly that kind of thing. So what you might want to be doing is forecasting from month to month the number of customers that are going to call in. That's very, very useful stuff, okay? But when you're doing predictive analytics, what you're trying to do is for a particular customer, or in this case, let's say a particular lead, you're trying to figure out what's the likelihood that they're going to respond, or what subject heading on an email is the best fit for them. Or given the fact that they've called in from the radio ad as opposed to the print ad, what's the best follow-up of 50 or 60 available follow-ups that you might want to utilize?
Terrific. Great advice as always. Thank you so much, Keith. And at 29 minutes after the hour, we'd better draw this event to a close. I'd certainly like to thank our attendees today for your sustained interest and your active participation, as well as Scott and Keith for their great presentation segments, and to Keith for your highly informative Q&A contributions. Let me go ahead and make a mute here. And we'll follow up shortly with an email that will have some resources and suggestions that will hopefully be useful to you. From there, we hope you've offered permission for us to stay in touch with the modeling agency's newsletter, and that you'll consider joining us at a public training event soon. Make sure to go to the website and check out the schedule and details for the courses starting in just a couple of weeks in Washington, D.C., or the upcoming online live experiential productions in November and December. Now, if you don't have a training budget or your schedule just doesn't fit but would like the guidance of a seasoned mentor like Scott or Keith, you might be interested in the modeling agency's Escort on Call program. Escort on Call is essentially a retainer account that provides remote open access to a TMA senior consultant via a platform that is essentially our training platform that makes it feel like the instructor is sitting just beside you. Simply open up an Escort on Call account and you've instantly added a wealth of experience and capability to your existing bench without expanding payroll, administrating complicated contracts, or taking elevated risk on larger commitments. We'll get you the answers you want, guide you through it tactically or strategically, show you how it's done, implement any analytic tasks you may wish to delegate, and then remain on call until the next time you need us. And meanwhile, when we're not actively working, you're not paying a dime. So a link to the Escort on Call description page will be among the resources included in the follow-up email. On behalf of myself, Scott, and Keith, thank you again for attending Predictive Analytics Failure to Launch. Have a very pleasant afternoon, and this brings the webinar broadcast to a close.